Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming to our webinar, Behind the Scenes with PJ Arway Book Selection Committee. I'm joined by Catriella Friedman, who's the director of PJ Arway, and Rachel Goodman, who is the PJ Arway Book Selection Associate. They're here to answer all of your questions about PJ Arway, how it might be different from PJ Library, what we're looking for in terms of manuscripts, and a whole lot more. So Catriella, could you give us a general idea of what PJ Arway is?
I certainly can. It's so exciting to see everyone here today. I just want to give a quick shout out to Tasha Flagg and Meredith Lewis, who are handling questions on the back end and tapped on the back end. And thank you to Emily for putting this whole author series together for us. So it's been a really amazing series, and we've really been looking forward to seeing all of you. So PJ Arway, the sister program of PJ Library, has been around since 2015. It's hard to believe that it's been around for so long because it still feels like it keeps changing and it's new. We serve kids ages 9 through 12. That's our main audience. We have more than 40,000 subscribers in the US and Canada, but that doesn't mean we send 40,000 books. Unlike PJ Library, subscribers are invited every month to go to the website, to go to Story Central. We'll share a link to an example from Story Central on the PJ Arway website, so you can see what it's like. Every month, subscribers get emails that remind them to go and select a book between the 1st and 10th of every month. They are given 4 unique titles to choose from. So from our point of view, from the book selection point of view, that's 48 titles a year, 48 Jewish middle grade books a year. So that's a lot for us to fill every year. We generally send out between 20 to 22,000 books a month. So if you divide that between 4, that means 25%, give or take per title. And we look to offer as many new titles as possible, which of course is not easy. Between titles that we use from the catalog, we try to leave a gap of 2.5 years. So after 2.5 years, if a book has done well 2.5 years ago in book selection, and if it's done well with kid reviews, which Rachel Goodman will tell you more about, then we put it back into our active lineup. Every month, we make sure to offer diverse selections, not just in terms of content, but also in terms of reaching different readers of different ages, different interests, different readiness in terms of every subscriber's reading abilities, but also in terms of their readiness for challenging content, which of course brings up pogroms, Holocaust, Spanish Inquisition, things like that. So we try to vary the content every month so that every reader will find something that's of interest to them. When you have a chance, take a look at the website, because the website is really important. Unlike with other programs, unlike with PJ Library, everything happens on our website. Kids can't get a book unless they actually select it every month from the website. So take a look at the website. We actually did a whole overhaul of the website a couple of years ago, so it's much more engaging. We have a parent side, a kid side. And when you're looking to write a book, when you're looking to write a Jewish middle grade book, and you hope it will become part of the PJ Arway catalog, what I tell authors is first look at our website. Take a look. It's now an amazing website. You can search, you can see tags, you can see genres and categories. See what kids like, because kids come back. We're kind of like the Goodreads for middle graders. Kids come back and they drop their comments on, and you're going to see more of that soon. So that would give you a really good sense of what kind of books we're really looking for. I also want to tell you that you are the first people in the universe to actually see our PJ Arway content framework, which will drop in the chat right now, and we'll also be talking about it later. When we get to the question of what kind of content are we looking for, we now can point people to the content framework. We can point authors, educators, creators, and the content framework is going to serve as the book selections guide in terms of choosing books for our lineup. We've always used these concepts in terms of choosing our books and selecting books for the lineup, but now we actually have it on paper and it's solidified in the digital world. So it's very exciting. Thank you for being here today so you can actually see it for the first time. Very exciting. So I want to just give you a brief history of what happens when we get a manuscript. So it really is behind the scenes with book selection. I want to start off by saying we are very eager to work with authors. We will do everything possible to make a book work for our program in many different ways. Sometimes it just doesn't work and we have to decline, but we really do try to work with authors so that authors have a chance to really reach their potential in terms of a book landing in our program. So Rachel Goodman tells me that we receive more than 300 manuscripts a year, which if you imagine a middle grade book being between 150 and 200 pages or 300 pages, that's a lot of pages and a lot of manuscripts. It comes in through Submittable, which we'll drop in the chat, how to submit a book using Submittable. It's a great resource for us. As soon as it comes through Submittable, we make a decision as to a manuscript reader to take a look at the manuscript and decide whether or not the book should go to the full book selection committee, or whether we should respond to the author, or whether we should decline at that point. We have agenda meetings, usually about once a month, where we read anywhere between 5 to 8 combinations of full manuscripts and partial manuscripts. And we can explain partial manuscripts a little bit later. At those meetings, we decide as a committee, are we declining the book? Are we declining the manuscript, I should say, with an option to resubmit and revise? Are we offering a partial incentive of $2,000, which is usually given to 3 complete chapters and an outline? Sometimes it will also be given to a full manuscript where we feel the manuscript has a lot of potential but needs enough changes that we're willing to invest in the $2,000 to encourage the author to continue. Is the manuscript ready to go to kid reviews, which Rachel will talk about? Do we suggest revisions? Is the manuscript ready for the full incentive of $5,000 and ready for a publisher? And then it will go to consideration for the full, for the PJRWay lineup. And I do want to say here that just because a book gets a full incentive of $5,000 doesn't necessarily mean it will end up in the PJRWay lineup. Lots of things can happen between giving the incentive and the book actually getting published. And we can go into more of those details. But this is our no strings attached way with the $2,000 and $5,000 incentive of saying, we want to support you. We want to thank you for contributing to the canon of Jewish children's books. And whether or not we end up using the book and purchasing the book, we really, we're happy that your book is in the trade world and is available for kids to read. We also have our special $10,000 author illustrator incentive for graphic novels, which sounds like a lot, but isn't when you consider what an author illustrator has to go through in terms of actually producing a full middle grade graphic novel, and considering the fact that graphic novels are our most popular category. At this point, I want to go back to kid teams and kid reviews and how they function in terms of our book selection. And I'm really, really happy to introduce you to Rachel Goodman, who's not just our book selection associate and coordinator, but also directs our kid teams.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm really happy to talk about this part of the book selection process because one of my favorite parts of my job is working with our kids teams who help facilitate, or I help facilitate kid feedback that is like a really integral part of the book selection process. So we have 2 kids teams that I work with, the advisory committee, which is a group of self-selected PJRWay kids, and they review books and manuscripts that PJRWay is considering offering for selection. And no book is ever offered for selection without their feedback. Basically, the way it works is if the book selection committee has a book that they think would be a good fit for the program, I will invite a few kids from the team to read and review it for us. And the committee takes this feedback super seriously, And there's definitely been times where the reviews kind of were like make or break for the submission. Either it didn't do as well as the committee expected, so they decided not to use it, or maybe it was a surprise hit and it ended up in the lineup after all. So that's a really important part of the book selection process. And our second team of kids is called the design team. And this is a group of kids who create content for our website, such as book videos, blog posts, recipes. Every fall, a group of 10 to 15 kids is chosen to be on this team, and we meet every month for about 6 months. And so they create all sorts of super creative, innovative content, polls, trivia questions, they interview authors, they share DIY tutorials, all on the PJROA website. So I definitely recommend that you visit pjroa.org/blog to check out some of their awesome projects. And if you know of a PJ Arway subscriber who's interested in joining one of these teams, I would also keep an eye on pjroa.org/blog because to get more information about how that's possible.
Thanks so much, Rachel, for sharing that really fun part of your job. I hear you also maybe get to moderate comments on the website. Can you tell us more about that?
Definitely. Yeah, so that is another way that PJ Arway receives kid feedback. And that's right after we've chosen a book and the kid has selected and received it, that kid is able to post reviews of books that they've read directly on our website for other kids to see when they're making their selection and for the book selection committee to review how the book did. And this is where I find that kids can be really honest about how they feel about what they're reading. They're just super perceptive and sometimes funny. So what I'd love to do is I'd like to share with you a book on the PJ Arway website and just show you kind of what the reviews look like. And then I've picked out a couple of my favorite reviews, I guess. So I'm going to share my screen. Oh, it says host disabled participant screen sharing. I guess I can't share my screen. I guess what I'll do then is I will post a link in the chat about one of the books that I think has a bunch of great reviews. Sorry about my dog. And so that you can check it out for yourself.
Rachel, tech support coming in to say you should be able to share now.
Thank you.
It's kind of like a voice from the divine.
Okay. In that case, I will share my screen after all. Okay. Everyone should be able to see it. Is that right? Okay, cool. So this is a book, Ace is Wild by Erica S. Pearl that PJ Arway has offered for selection. And this is like a book page, what anyone would see when they go to the website. You can see information about the book. These featured reviews are by the design team that I talked about earlier. So a member of the design team made this video, another one wrote this written review, and these are the first reviews that a kid would see if they're considering whether to select the book. And then all of these are reader reviews. So it goes on for 40 pages of reader reviews. So you can really deep dive if you want to and just see what other kids are actually saying about this book. I'm going to stop sharing and then share one more that I really like. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so these two reviews I think are some of the most honest and funny reviews that I've seen. The first one says, "This book is so good. I love it. It was adventurous and sweet. It made me appreciate my family. They're happy that this book is about a Jewish family and they wish it never ended." The second one says, "Don't even bother reading this book. It's so boring. The only reason I gave it 1 star was because I couldn't give it a 0. And the kind of punchline to this story is that both of these reviews are from the same book. So they're like almost one right after the other. So it just goes to show why choice matters, in my opinion, because a total winner in one kid's eyes might be, you know, a 1-star title in another, and that's because they couldn't give it a 0.
I'm going to interrupt just to make sure people know that these were not reviews for When Life Gives You OJ. It's an anonymous book.
That's correct.
Just scour the website if you want to find out which one it is.
All right, I have a question for Catriella that came, which is how much does one get paid for each book you publish, and when do people get these author incentives? You're muted, Catriella.
Emily, can you repeat your question just because I also lost sound?
Yes, so the question was, how much does one get paid for each book that you publish, and when do authors receive these incentives, the $2,000 for the partial, or the $5,000 for the full incentive?
Thank you for repeating it. So in terms of what an author gets paid by a publisher, although PJ Publishing does exist, to date, we have only published one middle grade book with PJ Publishing, and we are in the process of publishing another middle grade book with PJ Publishing, but by no means is PJ Publishing really taking on middle grade books. So I can't really give you an answer as to what publishers pay because we really don't get involved with that part of the negotiation. We show our support for a book with incentives, and once we've said, yes, please go find a publisher and we can help, or we can talk to your agent, etc. We don't come back in the picture until the book is ready, until the book has a publication date. And at that point, the negotiations start between our publisher manager and the specific publisher team. So we don't get involved with what the publisher pays the author. But what I can tell you is, aside from our author incentive awards, it's really important for authors to research what the going rates are for specific books, for specific titles, for specific page counts. We highly recommend going to the Facebook group Jewish Kidlit Mavens. It's a great place to just freely talk with other authors about what's going on in the marketplace. We also really recommend going to highlights and taking advantage of the many different programs featured on craft, getting an agent, publishing. And also I wanted to just highlight, and we can put this into the chat, we have PJ Library Highlight scholarships available. And so we really work closely with highlights to make sure that authors who do have strong potential and really want to be a part of highlights can actually afford doing it. In terms of when the author incentive award is usually given, you know, it's funny because people will ask, like, how long, when will we finally hear back from the book selection committee? And I can tell you that in our experience, it's usually better news if you don't hear back from us in a while, because it means that we're really thinking about the book, considering it, thinking about what kind of edit letter to send. So it's usually a good sign when you don't hear back from us immediately. If you hear back from us immediately, 9 times out of 10, it usually means that the book isn't going to work for the program. If it takes a while, it means we're really thinking about it. And we usually will offer an author incentive award, a partial. You'll usually hear about it 2 to 3 months after submitting a manuscript. And at that point, we'll be in conversation with you. And so you'll know when the other part of the incentive is coming. And it's really book dependent.
Thank you so much for offering some clarity around that. I have a few more questions for both of you. So I was wondering, Rachel, can you talk a little bit about how authors can get involved with PJ Arway in terms of these kid programs?
Yeah, definitely. So another way that our design team engages with PJ Arway is conducting author interviews or doing virtual author events. So usually a few times a year, we'll invite an author who has an upcoming PJ Arway book to one of our design team meetings, and we'll provide the kids with a copy of the book in advance. And they'll come in with all sorts of interesting and pertinent questions. And I feel like I usually tell the authors, like, prepare for 15 minutes of questions, and then it goes on for, you know, almost an hour often, just because the kids are so engaged and so excited to meet like a real live author. I'd like to share another screenshot just from one of the interviews to give you a sense of what they look like. They all happen over Zoom. So there's that. This is an interview with Catherine Newman from the PJRY selection book, How to Be a Mensch, a few months ago. And I am also going to drop some links in the chat in case you would like to watch any of these videos for yourself. I'm going to give you a few of my favorites to check out.
Thank you so much. To get back to content a little bit, we got a question from a participant who asked, what do you consider to be Jewish content? Catriella, could you answer that?
I'm so happy to answer that, actually, because that leads us back to the content framework, which is really a way of, why don't we throw it in the chat again, the link, so everyone can have access to it. And so in the content framework, we kind of highlight the three really salient aspects of a middle grade book in PJRY. So that an author, it's really important for an author to understand that kids in our program can choose their own book. They don't automatically get a book. The program's really about kid engagement, and books, we really look for books that will spark conversations. And that's why we say, go to the website first, because the website will show you what kids really like. And that's what drives us. If we go back to the things that Rachel has presented, we are really the only program out there, including amongst publishers, that does market testing with kids. Publishers don't do market testing with kids. We have to do market testing because we give kids choice. And so we need to know that the book is actually going to be liked by people other than the middle-aged people on our book selection committee, that kids will actually like the books. And so those should be your guiding principles, writing a book that kids actually want to read. And that the first thing you should do is think about, who is your audience? Who do you imagine reading this book? Now, if we go to Jewish content, the three areas that we really highlight that kind of measure the Jewish content in the book is, does the book have Jewish representation? Is the book about families and types of experiences that the reader will, that all our readers will recognize? Meaning that for some readers, it's going to be a mirror to what they're used to. For some readers, it's going to be a window into another Jewish world that hasn't been represented to them before. And so that's really important, is making sure that all our readers see themselves in the books that we offer, not in every single book, but in the general catalog that we offer. Then there are Jewish narratives, and those are Jewish stories. Do the stories come from the Torah? Do the stories talk about God from a Jewish perspective? Does the story highlight Jewish history? Or unfortunately also anti-Semitism, something that kids can understand? Does the book highlight Israel? And then we get to a third part, which has an interesting overlay with PJ Library, because we still want books that talk about Jewish values and Jewish life cycle, but with a real tween twist to it. Tweens today, which is our audience, they're looking to see themselves in the book. They're looking to see themselves as heroes in a book. And when they see Jewish values and life cycle events, they want to see it from a tween's point of view. So what does it mean in terms of my role in helping the world, in Tikkun Olam, in making a difference? And what Jewish spin is there with that? And I also want you to look to our small paragraph about the Holocaust, because it's a tension for all of us. We don't want the Holocaust to overwhelm our lineup, but on the other hand, we're very conscious of the fact that, as Carla Naumburg put it very wisely, this generation of kids that we're writing books for, by the time they're adults in the community and taking leadership roles in the community, there will no longer be survivors alive. And so it's really important that we also don't avoid the Holocaust and make sure kids can connect to it in an appropriate way. So I hope that kind of answers it. Please, study it, ask us questions, and it'll be our guide together.
I have a follow-up question that came from the Q&A, which is, how much Jewish content is enough Jewish content for PJRY?
So in terms of what's enough, it's a really hard question to answer. And so we look for a book to at least address one of these categories that I just described in the framework. So the book does not have to be completely focused on, this is what I'm doing Jewishly every day, but we want Judaism to play some role in the protagonist's life or some role in the plot, a crucial role. That doesn't mean that it has to take 15,000 words. It could be a few hundred words, but something that describes how one of these categories has a pivotal role in the book. I hope that helps.
Yes, I think that really clarifies things. We had another question from from someone who registered, which is, I have a question about adapting or rewriting Jewish folktales and texts. Do you have any input on this? Catriella, do you have any input on folks who are looking to maybe retell these kind of classic folktales or stories for a modern tween audience?
Well, the first thing that I would say is on the face of it, those books don't seem like stories that would be really popular with our readership. But we have a few examples of this kind of retelling that has been extremely popular. So it's really just about doing it the right way. The Rabbi Harvey series, you look on our website and you know Steve Schenken's series, have been out of the park favorites with all of our readers. And so Steve really managed to take what could be very kind of old-fashioned or not very contemporary stories and legends and make them so adaptable to kids. Also, the book While Standing on One Foot has been really, really popular. It's basically what the authors have done is they've taken stories from the Talmud and turned them on their head so that kids have to be in a position where they figure out what the answer is before the answer is given. Very, very popular. Herschel of Ostropol, Eric Camille, of course, does a great job with these, making the stories creepy and fun enough so that kids actually engage with it. And Emily, this is a great opportunity for me to give a plug, because if you're interested in taking some traditional Jewish folktales and some ancient texts and making them into stories for both PJ Library and PJ Arway, our next webinar of this series is just around the corner. It's going to be taking place in another month on July 20th at 12 p.m. Eastern, which is called Reading Between the Lines, using Midrash as a basis for your stories. And I just also wanted to tell you that we'll be adding more webinars to this series after the July one, so stay tuned.
Thank you for plugging our next webinar. I just put the registration information for that in the chat. We're partnering with Sefaria for that, which is an online resource for Jewish texts. So it should be really exciting for authors who are looking to get inspired or who want to learn how to do research into these texts and adapt them.
And we'll also be joined by Steve Schenken, author of Rabbi Harvey, and Matt Tonti, author of, I just blanked on the name.
The Book of Secrets by Matt Tonti.
Thank you.
We also have a question about kind of the opposite of adapting old tales, which is, what about kind of contemporary tales? We had a question from a panel participant that said, my book for middle grade readers is about mixing a Jewish family, but the plot isn't centered on a specifically Jewish issue. Would PJ Library be interested? Rachel, could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think Catriella mentioned this a little bit, and I'll just explain a little more. And the short answer is yes. We are interested in seeing that type of story. Many of our books are like that, right? Where one or more of the major characters is Jewish, but the plot itself does not revolve around Judaism. And if you're interested in learning more, or I'd recommend, like, not just for the specific question, but in general, checking out the books that are currently in our lineup and seeing what, just to get a sense of the type of books we offer and to see like the wide variety we offer when it comes to Jewish content, when it comes to genre and more. So I think this has been said, that you can head to pjarways.org/storycentral and you can browse our entire book list and you can toggle to the parent side of the website to check out the parent guides, which have detailed lists about Jewish content and values and other things, right, that adult readers might be interested in. And while we're here, I think I'd also like to recommend a few PJ Arway books that exist in our lineup that are in the vein of this question. They're, again, about a Jewish family, but the plot isn't centered on a specifically Jewish issue. So I'd like to recommend Lucky Broken Girl by Ruth Behar, Death by Toilet Paper by Donna Gephardt, and Not Your All-American Girl by Wendy Wanlong Ching and Madeline Rosenberg. I will put those links in the chat so that you can check out the books on the PJRWay website. And again, yes, we would like to see your story.
Thank you so much for those recommendations, Rachel. I saw a question in the chat. Yes, this is being recorded and we will be sending the recording to everyone who registered. So if you have to leave early, rest assured you'll get to see the rest of the webinar. So I had seen another question from the Q&A that maybe Catriella you could address, which is kind of different family structures in these types of stories, single parents or LGBTQ plus characters or families. Is that something that PJRWay is looking for in submissions?
Absolutely. And so we're going to put in the chat the PJ Library Diversity Statement, which also applies to PJRWay. But I would also just, again, I can't help but talk about the content framework. I'm a little obsessed with it. But our first category is Jewish representation, which talks about different family structures and all kinds of backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, linguistic backgrounds, family structures. And we already do have books in the lineup that touch on different family structures and kids who don't necessarily have parents, they have guardians, they have other adults in their life. And it's really important to our readers that they see that. We have so many readers, obviously, we're like the general population. We have readers who want to see themselves in stories. And it's really so important to them that they see families like themselves in stories. So making sure that we have stories that can relate to all of our different kinds of readers and the backgrounds that they're coming from. And also for them to know that other kids are reading stories about things that relate to them is also very empowering. So we really want to amplify those voices.
Thank you for that answer. I just saw another question come in, which is also about kind of what we're looking for, that you've asked for biographies, but I cannot imagine they were popular with the kid readers. Is that true? Rachel, could you answer that about biographies?
Yeah, definitely. I guess, of course, it depends on the reader. Like has been mentioned, PJRWay is about choice. So kids who want biographies can seek them out, and kids who aren't interested in them don't have to choose them. But we do have lots of biographies that are very popular with our readers. I would say especially the kind of biographies that are popular are like narrative, that are told in a really engaging way, and especially like the Who Is, Who Was series, that sort of graphic style with that's like visually appealing to kid readers.
And I would also, what Rachel just said is perfect. And I would also add to it that telling a biography story from the point of view of the subject when they were kids is really, really popular.
Yes, thank you for that. We had some more questions about the submission process. We had somebody ask, can you please explain what you're looking for in the required detailed outline or narrative? Rachel, could you kind of walk through the submissions process of what a proposal and detailed outline is?
Yeah, definitely. This is a great question. So PJRWay doesn't, hard and fast require a specific format for a detailed outline, but I can say that in order for the book selection committee to be able to make an informed decision about a given submission, the more details you include in your outline, the better. An example of a format that the committee would really like to see is 3 full chapters and then detailed summaries of all the remaining chapters. And those summaries can be, either prose or bullet points, but the most important thing is that it's there alongside your 3 full sample chapters. And again, the more details you include about your vision for the story, the more the book selection committee has to work with when considering your submission. And of course, you can get more information about the submissions process for both PJ Library and PJRWay by visiting pjlibrary.org/manuscripts. And that's also where you can find a link to our submissions form on Submittable.
Thank you. And are there any length requirements for those 3 chapters that would be submitted with a proposal?
That's a difficult question. I would say that like a complete book minimum would be that we would consider would be around 15,000 words. So, you can do the math and decide how many of those words you would like to provide to your 3 sample chapters. But yeah, I just want to reiterate though, like the more information, the more detail you can provide, it can be more than 3 chapters as well. That's not like the maximum length you can submit, but it'll just help the book selection committee make a decision. If the more you can give us, the better.
Thank you. Catriella, we got a question about submissions with text and illustrations. Can you tell us the process for submitting a graphic novel to PJRY?
Oh yeah, that's so. But in terms like just riffing off of what Rachel just said, it's part of the reason we have a partial submission for a partial incentive is we understand that investing the time into writing a book of any length, and I would just say that I would put the minimum at 20,000 words, 20,000 words at this point, just because we've gotten older. We were also sending books to 8.5-year-olds at some point, and now PJ Library ends when kids turn 9, and PJ always starts when kids turn 9. So as we've gotten older, and now we go through age 12, so we also have 13-year-olds in the program. The books that were 15,000, 16,000, 17,000 words are now seem more appropriate for PJ Library. So, we're saying like push it to 20,000. But we understand, if you're about to embark on writing 40,000 words, you don't want to write 40,000 words and find out PJRY has no interest. So as much as you can give us, but still understanding we don't want you to invest all your time into not knowing when you don't know whether it's going to work for us or not. So the same applies for graphic novels. We understand how much effort it goes into illustrating a graphic novel. So again, as much as you can show us, the better. So what we usually say is a frame, 2 frames illustrated with bubbles. And again, the more the merrier. So if you can provide more, the better, but just enough to give the book selection committee a sense of your artistic style, a sense of the characters, a sense of how it's pulled together, and a partial script. So that would be for a partial incentive. So a partial script and outline. So let's see, a good third of a script written out without illustrations and an outline of what else is going to happen in the book. That's the basics.
Thank you. We got a couple other questions about illustrations, such as, would you ever pair authors with illustrators for a graphic novel, or do you prefer a finished product with both already submitted?
We have done it. If an author comes to us and says, I'm not an illustrator, but I have a vision for what this graphic novel could look like. We have taken the step of trying to do a match between the author and an illustrator and an appropriate illustrator. Mostly, if an author is not an illustrator, they'll come to us with a script, and we'll see what happens in the publishing stage, and that will just be considered a regular submission. But mostly we get submissions, I would say 9 times out of 10, we usually get a submission that's illustrated by the author. So, but we can do that. And if there are any illustrators or author illustrators on this call who are interested in being matched up with an author, let us know. We're always happy to try to help facilitate that.
Great. And if an author and illustrator did get together and wrote a proposal together, would you accept that?
We would, and we would just divide the author illustrator incentive, which would end up being the same as a regular incentive, but now it's 5,000 for each.
And a related question that came in the Q&A for that, if an author receives a partial incentive, does PJRY provide editorial feedback? What does the editorial process look like at this stage?
Rachel, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, can you repeat the beginning of that question, please?
Yes, if an author receives a partial incentive, does PJRY provide editorial feedback?
Yes, so typically that would be the way it works. If the book selection committee has decided to award a partial incentive to a submission, they will, in addition to the incentive, they will provide feedback as to like they'll basically say, we think this could be a really good fit, and this is how we think that it could be an even better fit, right? How to really make it like perfect for our program. And so, yeah, they will provide a little bit of guidance before the author submits the full manuscript for another round of reviews by the book selection committee.
Thank you. We had another question asked from someone when they registered, which was, I live in Israel. Can I still write an English book?
As long as you can write in English, yes, of course. It doesn't matter where you submit from. The one thing that we ask is that the book be submitted in English. And so even if the book was originally written in Hebrew, as long as you can provide a translation. And in some cases, if we get a really strong recommendation from our sister program in Israel, Sifrei Pajama, that says this book has a lot of potential, we'll try to help facilitate a translation. But 9 times out of 10, we prefer to actually get the English translation.
Thank you. We have some more questions coming in from the Q&A. This one says, are there any subject areas that are overserved by existing content and manuscripts?
Good question. Okay, I'll say, and Rachel, you can add. The shtetl, overserved, I would say. We have been told by our readers that bat mitzvahs are overserved. See, this is where we diverge with kid readers, because we love reading about bat mitzvahs, but we would love to see more books about bar mitzvahs, but we've been told by our readers that they're tired of seeing it so much. So our readers have answered that question. Rachel, what would you add? We definitely need more books with animals. There's never enough. Animals are not overserved.
Yeah, I wouldn't add anything that was immediately what came to mind, the feedback we've received from kids about bat mitzvahs, but you know, I like those stories, so it's it's hard to recommend that.
Kinder transport is overserved. It's a great, aspect of relating books about the Holocaust to kids without getting into camps and ghettos. But we have a lot of books about kinder transport. And what happens is when we have a number of books that cover the same topic, we just don't get around to using them because we can't put them in every month. So when we look at, we have like a Swiss cheese kind of chart where we fill in books for the lineup. And if we have so many about the same topic, they're just not going to get put into the lineup. And Carla, I saw, wrote, this is not underserved, but this is underserved. Fantasy, humor, definitely.
Are there any other areas where you would love to see certain kinds of manuscripts come in?
Definitely books that you could imagine young readers enjoying. So something that doesn't get too complex, but still has great plot, great adventure, but isn't 200 pages. So if you're thinking about an emerging reader who also just doesn't have time to read 200 pages, if it's not their favorite thing to do, then a book that can take them on an adventure, fantasy, humor, which we said before, those are great books that kids really like. And then books set in contemporary times with things that kids can relate to. Someone wrote No More Cooking Competitions, but those actually are really popular. But anything that's sort of like reality TV or things that kids, MasterChef, or things that kids are relating to today. If you want to look at a couple of books that kind of have been some of our most popular books to get a sense. Charlie Thorne and the Last Equation by Stuart Gibbs, The Donut Fix and The Donut King by Jesse Janowitz. Those are very different books and yet have been seriously popular with our readers. So they like adventure, they like contemporary stories.
Thank you. We had another question, which is, are you interested in upper middle grade, like 13-year-old protagonists?
It's really tricky, right, Rachel? We really try to skirt the line between middle grade and YA. So it depends on why the book is geared towards 13-year-olds. Is it the content? Is it the historical background? Is it romance? As soon as it's romance, forget about it. You know, we try to keep our books clean because we know that parents are still really involved with book selection for their kids. We've learned through surveys that we thought kids were just going to come onto the website and do everything themselves, and it's not the case, especially for 9 and 10-year-olds. And when 9 and 10-year-olds come to the site, they're also seeing the books we're offering to 11 and 12-year-olds. So we really try to keep things away from romance. And we've heard from our readers, they're not ready to hear about the whole, going out scene. They like to keep things innocent even for themselves from that perspective. So it really depends on what the subject is. There's certain subjects that we have to also be cognizant of the fact that kids are reading this book, and unlike PJ Library, parents are most likely not reading the book. So we want to make sure that we're not introducing discussions and conversations that are way above what most of our readers would be prepared to have.
We have another question from the Q&A. With so much talk in the children's book industry about #ownvoices, do you discourage people from writing about something outside of our own experience? For example, a Jewish child with one parent that is not Jewish, or one parent of a different race, if that is not something that we've experienced in our life. Could you speak to that, Catriel and Rachel, about PJ Arway's stance towards own voices?
I can take a stab at it, and then Rachel, can you add? Because I think you'll have also perspectives from kids and perspectives in terms of the manuscripts that we offer. So in terms of really authentic perspectives on stories, that is kind of the a priori. Like, we would love to see that. But on the other hand, we're in a difficult position because we have to provide 48 Jewish middle grade books a year. And so we have enough Jewish voices on our panel, on our book selection committee. Not everybody on our committee is coming with either an affiliated Jewish voice or even a Jewish voice. And we do that deliberately because we want to have perspectives that come out of the Jewish world and can relate to the middle grade world in general. But we have enough Jewish voices to really be able to help an author if something isn't feeling authentic from a Jewish practice point of view, or from, frankly, an Ashkenazi point of view. When we get into other stories, like from Sephardic, Mizrahi backgrounds, or we're talking about Jews coming from different backgrounds that may not reflect the author, we are very happy to reach out to sensitivity readers and reviewers who can help us make sure that the book the book is relatable and feels authentic. I would say the one area where we would feel quite strange is we mostly would want Holocaust books or Holocaust books coming from Holocaust subjects to have an author who relates directly, obviously not directly from their own experience, their own lived experience, but has a strong connection to the subject, because we really look for authenticity with those stories. And that's so super important because of the historical nature of the Holocaust. Rachel, did I miss anything with that, or is there something you would add?
Yeah, I don't think so. I agree with what you said. We would not actively discourage something like that. Like, you don't even have to be Jewish to submit to PJ Arway, but we are also interested in amplifying authentic voices. I think our diversity statement was placed in the chat at some point, and so yeah, I would take a look at that.
Thank you both. We got a couple questions about this. I see one in the Q&A. What about Israel-Palestine themes? And are you interested in books about Israel, historical biographies, or contemporary stories?
Definitely interested in stories about Israel. And if you look at our framework, we kind of outline it, I think, very well. Does Israel show up in a few places? But in terms of Jewish narratives, we have an Israel section, which is basically, we're looking for histories of ancient Israel, the founding of the state of Israel, the kibbutz movement, the people and places, and this is really important, the people and places of today's Israel, especially as it has turned into a hub, and this is important, of Jewish culture, traditions, and creativity. So those connections back to what we recognize in North American culture and their connections to Israel culture. Israeli holidays and traditions, because they're different than North American holidays or the way Jewish holidays are celebrated outside of Israel. And so that's another window for kids into something that they didn't know about in terms of Israel, with an emphasis on contemporary connections to Israel, including kids, tweens living in Israel and how that life is so different. And so in terms of answering the sort of political question, I think two really good examples by the same author, Tamar Stein, The Six-Day Hero and the sequel, Benny's War, is a great example of a book, really the first books to ever talk about wars in Israel from a middle grade perspective. And I think the reason those two books are so great is because they take the point of view of a kid dealing with a very complicated political situation, which means that the kid is relatable to readers, because no kid wants to read about the politics and the things going on an adult level. It's boring and it's complicated and it's out of context. So I would say what we really want to come out with is we really want to come out with a sense that Israel is special to Jewish people. Israel is special to Jewish history, and Israel is not Italy. There's something about it that's different for us and for our readers.
We have another question coming in from the Q&A, which I think is a follow-up to when you're listing topics that you'd like to see more in the books. What do you mean by stories about animals? Do you mean actual animal characters or human characters that have animals? What do you mean by more animal stories?
So since I said it, I'll take a first stab, which is kids just seem to love books where animals play some sort of role, either as the pet in the family or helping the plot move forward. We posted before When Life Gives You OJ by Erica Pearl and the sequel Ace is Wild, both wildly popular in our program, even survived being offered multiple times in the first 2 years of our program because we just didn't have any of the books that kids liked at that time. And they just really relate to a protagonist and her dog. Horses, not as much. When I was a kid, every kid wanted books about horses. I don't know, horses have not been as popular, but we have a book coming out soon that's told from the perspective of the protagonist who turns into a cat. And our kid readers, we'll see how it does in selection, but our kid readers love it.
Thank you.
Anything to add, Rachel? Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to add, give another plug for my design team and advisory committee, because next month, in conjunction with offering Saving Hannah, another story about a dog, my advisory committee and design team all submitted photos of their own pets and wildlife to be featured alongside the book. So that'll be available on pjrway.org next month. So check it out.
Thank you. We have another question that I want to tie into this, which is about violence in the content of the manuscripts. I know something that I've heard before about PJ Arway is that the death of a pet is something that you don't really want to touch in your stories. And can you speak more to violence? And also, this question was specifically about a biography about a boxer whose life was devoted to fighting, but as a sport. Is that something you would be interested in?
Can I get the second part of that question again?
Sure thing. I'll slow down a little bit. So 2 questions. How do you deal with the content of violence in the manuscripts? And I was asking to come off the animal question about pet death as a topic, but also what do you do about violence in the context of, say, war or someone who is a boxer where the violence is as a sport?
So yeah, kids don't really like to see animals die. In fact, I'll relate a story that, again, goes back to Tamar Stein's Six-Day Hero, which was a book that we received. It was the first book we received as a manuscript that we actually helped bring to publication, because early on, we really couldn't do that with manuscripts. And now, because the program has grown so much, we're really able to work with manuscripts and know that they're not coming out for another 2 years, but we can use them. And we had a committee of kids read the manuscript. It was the first time we did that. And we thought, oh, it's a book about war, and there's some violence and spoiler alerts, and some characters die because they fight in the war. And we wanted to see how our kids going to react to that. And not a single kid mentioned that one of the characters died, but they all mentioned something that none of us on the committee even noticed, which is there's a cat that dies. So we realized that it's a really sensitive thing to kids, and that was what that's what I'm sorry to give away that a cat dies in 6 Day Hero, you should still read it. But it was something that kids, that's what they could relate to. A lot of them have pets. A lot of them can imagine how devastating it could be for an animal to die. Whereas the idea of someone in their family dying, if they haven't experienced it, it's too hard to relate to. So connecting that to violence, yeah, we try to stay away from any kind of graphic violence, including boxing, but we have found that there is a way of skirting over the details of graphic violence and also the details of boxing, for instance, that could work in a middle grade book. It's a really tricky balance, but we're open to receiving manuscripts that have violence, and we can hopefully be able to help guide the author in terms of making it the right tone and level for our readers.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. So someone asked, do you have any advice for someone submitting for the first time? Are there any rookie mistakes to avoid when submitting a manuscript to PJ Arway?
Rachel, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so things that come to mind are just really simple, like technical things that can, like, they're not going to disqualify you, but they might slow down the process. And one of those things is like all of our submissions are reviewed anonymously. So we do ask that when you're actually uploading the file of your book or manuscript, you don't include your name or any identifying information on the file. Obviously, the people who process the submissions will see who you are because they'll have access to the name of the person who submitted, but our actual book selection committee will not know who wrote what submission. So that is one recommendation that I have to a first-time submitter. And the other recommendation, I guess, as I mentioned, is just like scour pjlibrary.org/manuscripts. And there's so many resources there about submission guidelines, about the Author Incentive Award, the PJ Library Content Framework, the new PJ Arway Content Framework. All of that is accessible on what we call our Author Hub. So I would definitely recommend looking at that page to hopefully find some more answers to your questions.
Did we mention that there's a PJ Arway Content Framework?
Yeah, Catriella, do you have any advice to people submitting for the first time?
I think Rachel really covered it well, and Rachel has a lot of experience in terms of helping authors through that process. So, you know, don't be worried about rookie mistakes. We love you all. We want to see your books. We want to see your manuscripts. We want to see them work for us, and so we will overlook various picadillos and submissions and help you get through the process. But I think Rachel covered it all.
Thank you for that. I think that's a wonderful note to end on. You know, we so look forward to seeing more submissions from everyone who attended today's webinar. Thank you, Rachel and Catriella, for all of your amazing, thoughtful answers. And thank you to all of our participants for your wonderful questions. Again, this webinar was recorded and we will be sending it out to everyone who registered. So if you missed something, you'll be able to watch it again. And we really hope that you'll join us for our next webinar next month, which is about Midrash and adapting Jewish texts for contemporary kid lit. So thank you all so much for being here.
And thank you, Emily, for moderating. Thanks, everyone.